If you're 60 years old and thinking about handing in your notice, you're not just retiring. You're stepping into a 7-year gap, and closing that gap costs £228,900 in cash you can actually get your hands on. That's not a scare figure. It's what a single person needs, in today's money, to cover a moderate lifestyle for the 84 months between leaving work at 60 and your state pension arriving at 67. Most people spend their 40s and 50s thinking about their forever pot, the number that has to last the rest of their life. Nobody sits them down and shows them the smaller, more dangerous number hiding inside it, the years before the state pension turns up. Those years are the most dangerous stretch of the whole retirement, because for that period you are your own government, your own employer, and your own safety net, all at once. By the end of this video, you'll have what I call the bridge building mechanism, a 3-source method for generating roughly £33,000 a year, largely free of tax, that protects you from something called sequence of returns risk, the exact trap that has forced early retirees back into work after a bad first few years in the market. There's no employer topping up your pay that month, and no automatic paycheck landing at the end of it, just the decisions you've already made sitting there doing the work for you. I've watched people build this bridge well, and I've watched people fall straight through it. The difference usually isn't luck. It's whether they understood the change coming in April 2027, a change that shrinks your best building material for this bridge, cash ISAs, well before most people even notice it's happened. So before we get to the framework, let's look at the maths that catches most people short. Let's start with what that 7-year gap actually costs, because the number is bigger than most people expect. According to the Pensions and Lifetime Savings Association's Retirement Living Standards, updated for 2026, a single person needs £32,700 a year for what they call a moderate lifestyle, meaning a 2-week holiday in Europe, a car that's a few years old, and being able to help the grandchildren without stress. A couple needs £45,400. Stretch either of those across 7 years, from 60 to 67, and you land somewhere around £228,900 for a single person, before your state pension has paid you a single penny. Here's the trap almost everyone falls into without realizing it. They think of that money as spending their retirement pot, so they treat it the same way they treat the rest of their savings, invested for growth, sitting in the stock market, waiting to compound. But you're not spending in those 7 years, you're funding a gap. Funding a gap with money that needs to stay invested for 20 or 30 years is where the damage starts. This is where something called sequence of returns risk comes in, and it's worth understanding properly, because it isn't just a finance term, it's the actual mechanism that wrecks early retirements. If the market drops 20% in your first year of retirement, and you're still pulling £33,000 out to live on, you're not just down 20%. You're selling more units at a lower price to get the same income, which means there's permanently less of your pot left to recover when the market bounces back. A market fall at 45, while you're still working and adding money, barely registers over a working life. The same fall at 60, while you're withdrawing, can take years off how long your money lasts, sometimes for good. Dumping the whole £228,900 into a current account isn't the answer either. That money would be eaten away by inflation over 7 years. What you actually need is a structure. 3 different sources working together, so none of them are doing all the work or carrying all the risk. That's the bridge. Let's build it. The framework I use is what I call the tiered bridge, and it has 3 layers, each doing a different job. Tier 1 is the ISA, your tax-free engine. Any income that comes out of an ISA, whether it's a cash ISA or a stocks and shares ISA, is invisible to HMRC. No tax, no reporting, nothing to declare. This is where your first year or 2 of bridge income should sit, in cash or near cash, so it isn't exposed to a market fall right when you need to draw on it. Tier 2 is your personal allowance, and I think of it as the zero-tax pension draw. Every person in the United Kingdom can earn £12,570 a year before paying a penny of income tax. If you draw your pension carefully, up to that threshold, from a taxable source, HMRC doesn't touch it. Tier 3 is the UFPLS slice, which stands for Uncrystallised Funds Pension Lump Sum, your tax-free cash extender. Instead of taking your 25% tax-free lump sum as a single big withdrawal on day one, you take it in slices alongside your taxable income, spreading the tax-free portion across several years instead of burning it all at once. I used to tell people to take their 25% tax-free lump sum on day one and pay off the mortgage. I was wrong. In today's high inflation, high tax environment, that lump sum is your most powerful bridge-building tool, but only if you leave it inside the tax-free wrapper and slice it out over several years instead of spending it all at once. Here's how Tier 2 and Tier 3 work together, and it's a genuinely useful bit of maths. Your personal allowance gives you £12,570 of tax-free taxable income. Add a tax-free slice of £4,190 from a pension withdrawal under UFPLS, and you've generated £16,760 of income in a single year without paying HMRC a single pound. Layer that on top of your cash ISAR income from Tier 1, and you can see how £33,000 a year starts to look achievable without triggering a large tax bill. This works cleanly today. But there's a change landing on the 6th of April, 2027, that makes Tier 1, your tax-free engine, considerably harder to fill from that date onward. Let's look at why that matters, and why it matters more the further back in time you can see it coming. To see why sequence of returns risk isn't a theoretical worry, look back to 2008. Anyone who retired in 2007, with their whole 7-year bridge sitting in stocks and shares, watched the financial crisis hit within months. Many major stock markets fell by 40% or more from their peak. If your entire bridge income was tied up in that market at exactly the point you needed to start drawing from it, that bridge didn't just wobble, it partially collapsed. Some of those retirees went back to work in their 60s, not because they wanted to, but because the maths no longer worked. Here's the number that puts the whole 7-year bridge in perspective. According to the Office for National Statistics, a man reaching 65 today can expect, on average, another 18.7 years of life, taking him to around 84. A woman's figure runs higher still. That means the bridge you're building from 60 to 67 isn't your whole retirement. It's roughly the first 30% of it. That reframes the entire decision. You cannot afford to let the first 30% of your retirement, the bridge years, damage the remaining 70%, the years after your state pension arrives, by being too aggressive with how that bridge money is invested. The bridge needs to be sturdy and boring. The rest of your pot, the part still growing for decades afterward, can afford to take more risk. If you're one of the millions now facing a state pension age of 67, instead of 66 or 65, part of what I'd call the gap generation, this channel is built around exactly this kind of maths. Subscribe to Arthur's UK Retirement Guide because we focus specifically on how the UK tax system works during these bridge years, so you don't hand HMRC more than you have to during what should be some of your best years. Now let's deal with the change I mentioned earlier because it directly affects Tier 1 of your bridge, the ISAR. Right now, in the 2026 to 2027 tax year, you can put the full £20,000 ISAR allowance into a cash ISAR if you want to, regardless of your age. From the 6th of April 2027, that changes. If you're under 65, the amount you're allowed to put into a cash ISAR drops to £12,000 a year. The rest of your £20,000 overall ISAR allowance will still exist, but the remaining £8,000 will have to go into a stocks and shares ISAR instead. Here's why that matters for someone building a bridge. Picture two people, both aiming to retire at 60 with the same 7-year gap to fill. The first person waits until after April 2027 to start building their cash bridge. From that point, they can only get £12,000 a year into cash, So £8,000 of what should be their safest, nearest term money gets pushed into the stock market instead, exposed to exactly the kind of fall that hit the 2008 retirees right when they'll need to draw on it for year 1 or 2 of retirement. The second person uses this tax year, the one running to the 5th of April 2027, to put the full £20,000 into a cash ISA while that's still allowed. Over 2 tax years, that's up to £40,000 of genuinely safe, liquid money locked into the tax-free wrapper before the door narrows. That's most of 2 years of bridge income sitting somewhere the market can't touch it. Neither path feels dramatic on its own. But 5 or 6 years into a bridge, the difference between drawing from cash you locked in early and drawing from shares you were forced into late can be the difference between a steady income and a forced sale during a bad month. You've got the cash sorted. The next question is how you draw the rest, your pension, without HMRC taking a bigger bite than it needs to. That comes down to something called the slice. Let me show you what this looks like with a real scenario, because the numbers are where this actually clicks. Take David, 60 years old, ready to retire, needing £30,000 a year to live comfortably. The market goes flat for 3 years right as he stops working. No crash, but no growth either, which is actually one of the more common outcomes, not the dramatic one. Unprepared David does what feels natural. He takes his full 25% tax-free lump sum straight away, £100,000, and parks it in a standard savings account so he can see it and feel safe. The interest on that account is taxable once it passes a small threshold, so he starts owing tax on money he thought was untouchable. He then draws the rest of his £30,000 from his pension as ordinary income, and because he's taking it all in a single stream, he crosses into the 20% tax bracket almost immediately. Prepared David uses UFPLS instead, taking his pension in slices rather than a single lump sum. Each year he draws £20,000 through this method. Of that, £5,000 counts as his tax-free 25% portion, and £15,000 is taxable. Because he still has his full £12,570 personal allowance to use against the taxable portion, only £2,430 of it actually gets taxed at 20%. Run the numbers and Prepared David pays roughly £486 in tax that year. Unprepared David, drawing a similar level of income but without the structure, ends up paying several thousand. Same pension pot, same age, same flat market. The only difference is which parts of the pot, each of them exposed to tax first. Carry that gap across the full 3 flat years of this scenario, and it stops being a rounding error. Unprepared David has handed HMRC several £1,000s that Prepared David kept, money that could have stayed inside the wrapper, still working, still available for the years further down the bridge. Ask yourself which version of that story sounds more like something you'd want a future version of you explaining, the one who checked the structure first, or the one who found out the hard way after the fact. That £12,570 personal allowance is what I think of as the invisible bridge, the piece almost everyone forgets is even there, because it doesn't arrive as a check. It just quietly reduces what HMRC is allowed to take. Most people are so focused on the big lump sum that they never stop to use the allowance sitting right in front of them every single year, for free. So how do you actually put this into practice? 4 steps, and none of them need a spreadsheet you don't already understand. Step 1 is what I call the 5-minute size up. Take your expected yearly spending in retirement, subtract any guaranteed income you already have coming in, your workplace pension in payment, any annuity, anything guaranteed. Whatever's left is your yearly gap. Multiply that by the number of years between when you plan to stop working and when your state pension actually starts. That single sum gives you your bridge target, the number you're actually building toward, rather than a vague sense that you'll probably need quite a lot. Step 2 is the access check. Before any of this works, you need to know when you're actually allowed to touch your private pension. Right now that's 55 for most people, but if you were born on or after the 6th of April 1973, your access age jumps from 55 to 57 on the 6th of April 2028. If that change affects you, it changes how early your bridge can even start, so check it before you build any plan around a specific retirement age. Step 3 is the ISARE front load. Use as much of your £20,000 ISARE allowance as you reasonably can, ideally in cash for the portion you'll need in the first year or two, before the restriction to £12,000 for arrives on the 6th of April 2027. Every pound you get into a cash ISARE before that date keeps its full tax-free status for as long as it stays there, restriction or no restriction. Step 4 is the slice setup. Not every pension provider allows what's called partial drawdown or UFPLS. Some older pensions, particularly ones opened decades ago, only allow you to take your tax-free cash as a single lump sum or force you into an annuity. Before you rely on the slicing strategy from earlier in this video, contact your provider and confirm, in writing if you can, that they support flexible partial withdrawals. If they don't, you may need to transfer to one that does. And that's worth knowing years before you retire, not in the month you hand in your notice. A transfer itself can take weeks to complete properly, so this is the step most worth checking early, long before the actual retirement date is fixed. Here's the honest part. None of these 4 steps are complicated. The maths in step 1 takes 5 minutes. Checking your access age takes a single phone call. So why do so many people never actually do it? It isn't the arithmetic that stops them. It's something more basic, a trick our own brains play on us when a very large number is sitting in front of us. The bias working against you here is something researchers call loss aversion, though I'd give it a simpler name, lump sum lust. When you've spent 40 years building a pension pot, there's something deeply appealing about the idea of one big number landing in your account, £100,000 or more, tax-free, sitting right there in your own bank where HMRC genuinely cannot touch it. It feels safe. It feels like proof that the whole thing was worth it. That feeling is completely normal, and I'd never tell you it's silly. You worked for that money for decades, wanting to see it, to hold it, to know it's finally yours outright. Isn't a character flaw. It's just how our brains are wired. We trust what we can see far more than we trust a plan spread across several years. The reframe that actually helps is this. Stop thinking of your pension as a pot sitting in the distance, waiting to be cracked open. Think of it instead as a personal tax-free salary, one you pay yourself, in careful amounts, for as many years as it needs to last. Taking it in slices isn't giving anything up. It's giving yourself a pay rise, because every pound you keep inside the tax-free structure a little longer is a pound HMRC doesn't get a cut of. I remember sitting with a coffee once, looking at my own pension projection, and feeling that exact itch, the urge to just take the lump sum and go and buy something with it, a new car, anything solid I could point to. It's a hard impulse to argue yourself out of, even when you know the maths says otherwise. Knowing that the pull is normal doesn't make it disappear, but it does make it easier to recognize it for what it is, before it costs you a few £1,000s in unnecessary tax. So here's the whole picture brought back together. The bridge between stopping work and your state pension starting is roughly 7 years for most people retiring around 60. For a single person, filling it at a moderate standard of living takes something in the region of £228,900. That sounds enormous until you break it into 3 tiers working together: your cash ISARE for the years you need money soonest, your personal allowance to draw pension income tax-free up to £12,570, and your tax-free lump sum taken in slices through UFPLS rather than all at once. None of this requires you to take more risk. If anything, it requires you to take less, right when it matters most, and to be deliberate about which pound comes from where. You already have every tool you need to do this properly. The gap between retiring and your state pension isn't a trap waiting to catch you out. It only becomes one if you stop walking before the bridge is actually built. Build it while you're still working, while you still have a wage coming in to fill any gaps in the plan, and those 7 years stop being frightening and start being just another stretch of a much longer retirement. If you want to make sure your own bridge is structurally sound before you hand in your notice, subscribe to Arthur's UK Retirement Guide and have a look at our deeper dive into exactly how the 2027 ISARE changes will affect your allowance.